So different fishing opportunities. So Western North Carolina, right at our front door of our shop, we've got roughly 5,000 miles of viable trout water. 4,000 of which, 90% of which is public. That's about 10 lifetimes worth of fishing right there. We have some of the destination tailwaters. People fly from all over the country and the world at that to come and fish a couple of the tailwaters that we have in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee area.
So I'm a much better fishing guy than I am a public speaker, so I'm going to hide behind this podium and use a microphone. So like Patrick was saying, we have two really great tailwaters just over the mountain from us in East Tennessee. They're right up in the northeast, and those are the South Holston and the Watauga tailwaters. These two rivers, if you hit it right, it can be world-class fishing. And some of the reasons are that both these rivers sit on limestone bedrock. That's an anomaly for the southern Appalachian Mountains. Most of our bedrock is granite, which is not particularly fertile. There's not a lot of minerals in granite. Limestone, on the other hand, is very basic, the opposite of acidic. So it acts as a filter, and it filters all the acid out of the water. That's very beneficial to aquatic life, bugs. Anything that's good for bugs, good for fish. That's one reason these rivers are so good. The very cold water temperatures, the water temps on these tailwaters stay colder in the summer, and actually they're warmer in the winter than our mountain streams. Your mountain streams in Western North Carolina can fluctuate from mid-30s all the way to mid to high 60s, depending on the time of the year. And on these tailwaters, you have a much more condensed range for that temperature, which the fish really like. There's a lot of different kinds of bugs. You can find caddis, mayflies, a number of different species of mayflies, midges, and then, like it says there, both these rivers have scuds, and a scud is a freshwater shrimp. And just like the shrimp and the reds and all y'all's fish down here, it's 100% protein. And any river that's got scuds has the potential to grow some really large fish. Another reason that these two rivers are so prolific. Consistency, again, back to that. The water is basically 48 degrees when it comes out of the dam, whether it's January or July. Both these lakes, the dams are bottom draw, so they're drawn off the bottom of the lake, so you don't have a fluctuation. And that consistency, now as that water moves down the river, both these tailwaters, the Holston's about 15 miles long, give or take, and the Watauga's a little bit longer, maybe 22, 25 miles, something like that. And that water will warm up in the summer, as it gets to those lower miles, but we really very rarely see anything over 60. And so you're still in a real good zone there. Because trout are generally never happier than at 52 to 55 degrees. Another thing, the water levels, they vary a lot. Both these rivers, when the dam is turned off, they're both fairly easy to wade. When they are running water from the dam, there is no wading. It is not possible to wade when they've got these dams cut loose. And that's where we tend to push people toward the float trip, because it just gives you the versatility. On a perfect day when the river's off all day, sure, you can wade all day, no problem. Does that happen a lot? Not really. Both these rivers have a number of access points, but I wouldn't say that public access is overabundant. It's enough for us to be able to fish the river, but we could always use more access. The biologists have done studies the last few years. The upper half of both of these rivers probably carries somewhere between 6,000 to 7,000 fish a mile. That is a lot. Anywhere you go in the country, that is a lot of fish. These are not huge rivers, a couple of 100 feet across maybe. So you think about 6,000 or 7,000 fish in a river mile. That's pretty serious. Now, that's counting anything from here to here. So it's not like it's all 20 inches, but both these rivers, they have a ton of fish. And as you go down the river, typically your numbers will decrease some, but your average size of your fish will increase. And that's useful information. You know, if all you're wanting to do is hunt a really big fish, you know, you may increase your chances going middle to lower end versus staying up on the upper end where you can catch, like he said, you know, 100's a lot, but 50's pretty doable on a fairly regular basis, depending on, you know, skill level and all of those kind of things. So in the winter, we are not particularly busy December, January, and February. A lot of that is because it can be really, really cold. So cold that nobody would, in their right mind at least, would want to be out there and, you know, be fishing. That being said, our average winter day, if you took the average over the whole winter, you know, our average winter day is probably a high of 50-ish, maybe 52, something like that. That's not too bad if you dress right. And, you know, some of the advantages to fishing in the winter are that you're not going to see everybody and their brother. You know, you're going to have a lot more solitude. But generally speaking, fishing is pretty good. We have good betas, which I don't know if any of y'all know what a blue-winged olive is, the small mayfly. But we have good olive hatches in the winter, as well as midge hatches. One little anecdote about that kind of winter fishing. I had a fellow that fishes with me a lot back in January, and we had a pretty good morning. It was a fairly warm day, maybe 52, 55 high, something like that. And they had cut the water on, and the water comes up, and all of a sudden, I see one of the best blue-winged olive hatches. For probably about 2.5 hours, we had an insane blue-winged olive hatch. And all we did was fish to rising fish for 2.5 hours in the middle of the day in January. That's pretty tough to beat. You know, so that exists, that's available. Generally speaking, I don't want to make it sound like it's all dry fly fishing. Most of the fishing in the winter is going to be subsurface net fishing. But the dry fly opportunities do exist with the blue-winged olives and stuff. March, pretty volatile month weather-wise. It may be 75, it may be 25. You know, the fishing in March typically is really good. These fish, these first really warm days, these fish are waking up. They've been in winter mode all winter. They're hungry. They're ready to go. They're ready to eat. March can have some really, really good net fishing. Still on the blue-winged olive some. I wouldn't bank on dry fly fishing in March. It can happen, but really good net fishing for some pretty quality fish. And then once you get into April, that's prime time. On the Watauga particularly, I could probably find a ton of people to disagree with me. In April and May, you will almost never see me on the Holston unless I'm forced to go over there by water flows. Because the Watauga is fantastic. We get a caddis hatch. In April, it's usually the last 3 weeks of April. You usually start seeing them the second week. These are big bugs. And for us, a big bug is a 12, some of them are 10s. For y'all down here red fishing, that isn't too big of a bug, but for us, that's a big bug. And lots of 12s and 14s. And usually for 3-4 hours a day, you know, you'll see these bugs come off in big numbers. And when they do, the big fish are going to come up on top. Now, they may not be sitting out in the middle of the river where anybody can see them. Usually, the bigger the fish, the tighter his lie is on the bank. It's not going to be the easiest cast or drift in the world, but he's over there and he's eating steak. And he's just munching these 12s, one after another. And I'm talking every year, you know, we see brown trout in the 24-inch range rising to dry flies. That's just about the only time consistently on our rivers that you'll ever see a fish that large coming up on top consistently. Short of maybe a cicada year or something like that. You know, we see 16 and 18-inch fish rise pretty regularly if there's enough bugs to make it happen. But during the caddis hatch in April on the Watauga, it happens and it happens every day. I see a ton of fish caught the first couple of weeks of the hatch on elk hairs. Once they've seen a lot of that and gotten stuck a few times, you're going to have to go to something a little bit more, in-depth. I tie a CDC fly where I'm wrapping CDC, but there's nothing on the bottom side of the hook, so the fly route's dead flush on the top of the water. Weather usually stabilizes pretty well in April. April, we can still have some pretty cold mornings. It might be freezing to start with, but it's probably going to end up being 65, 70, 75. May, you get some fantastic weather. Start in the morning 60, 55, 60 in the morning, 75, maybe 80 in the afternoon. And then on the back end of that caddis hatch, you'll see the sulfurs start. And sometimes they'll actually intermingle. The caddis can hatch for 4 hours in the morning, and then in the evening, you may see sulfurs. So you may have several different things going on at the same time. That's on the Watauga. The Holston is a little bit different. The South Holston does not have caddis per se. There are some, but not enough to make a large impact. It's more of a mayfly river, and the Holston kind of cranks up a little bit later than the Watauga. You'll start seeing sulfurs in the very lower end of the South Holston, usually about the first week of May, and that can be really good fishing. But like I said, that time of year, I really have a hard time getting off the Watauga both those months, unless it's just, the scenario there is if one river's running at the dam and the other one's not, I'm going to go where there's less water. High water is not always a bad thing, but generally speaking, I always want less. Less means sight fishing. Less means it takes a little bit more of the luck out of the equation and brings the skill into the equation a little bit more. I can go find that fish that I want to fish to. On low water, on high water, that's really not an option. So summer, let's mostly kind of call that, maybe the last part of June, July, August, first part of September. You always hear, people that are familiar with the river, you always hear people talk about the sulfurs on the South Holston. Most of the time when you hear people talk about that, what they're referring to is the upper 5 miles of the river, the first 5 miles down from the dam. And usually somewhere in the second, third week of June range, could be earlier. None of this stuff is set in stone, but in that vicinity, usually you will start seeing the sulfurs hatch just about every single day on that upper 5 miles to varying degrees. Sulfurs are a yellow mayfly. They're typically a 16. Sometimes you see 14s, sometimes 18s. They like sun. So if you have bad luck and draw the rainy day, you're probably not going to see a lot of bugs that day. If you get the normal summer day where it's sunny, you're going to get a good hatch. And it gets really consistent. Usually those bugs, in years past, typically the peak is around July the 4th, give or take. They'll continue all the way through August. Every day, some days you'll see 500,000 bugs, some days not as many. When you hit it right, it can be blankets of bugs, like the stuff you see on the fly fishing movies going down the river. There can be too many bugs where the fish, it can be hard to catch a fish because there's too many real ones out there. That can happen, but not very often. Generally in the summer, both rivers, pretty good terrestrial fishing. We don't have hoppers like they do in Montana because we don't have a lot of grass beside our rivers. What we have is Japanese beetles. And once those Japanese beetles come out, that's a big meal for our fish. That's a lot of protein. And once those Japanese beetles show up, the fish, they'll get pretty tuned up to them. And you splat that beetle on the bank just like you would a hopper out west, and bingo, bango, you raise a fish. If all goes according to plan. Another thing we do in the summer, we fish some big Chernobyl patterns. These aren't particularly representative of anything, and they're big flies. For us again, that's a really big fly. And we fish some big Chernobyls both as an indicator. as a dry, and it's really fun to see a nice fish come up and just, unload on a big bug like that. So there's a striper in the picture. Both rivers, the stripers will come out of the lake in the summer. Not all of them, but some of them. And they'll set up in the river in packs. And they'll only be in certain places. This is not something, we can't go striped bass fishing all day long. It's more of a side attraction to the trout fishing, more so than something, you don't want to say, hey, I want to go striper fishing all day. You want to say, hey, let's go trout fishing and put a little striper fishing in there with it. And these things will sit in the deep holes, so they're only kind of in certain places. They're pretty awesome. Up in the river, the ones we see, almost all of them are like 12 to 30 pounds. There's not too many little ones. It's really cool. And fly fishing for them, it works. A 9-weight, a sink tip, it's some work. And you got to make a lot of casts. Stripping big shad streamers for them. The flies aren't particularly heavy because you're fishing a sink tip, but throwing an 8 or 9 weight in a sink tip for extended periods of time is work. And we can also, I will say this, I don't want to offend anybody, we can gear fish these stripers as well. Tennessee is a state where it's legal to use rainbow trout as a bait. So you're going down through there, like I said, I don't want to offend anybody. Don't knock it till you tried it, it's really fun. You fly fish, you catch a couple of stocked rainbows, we're not going to kill wild fish. You throw them in a bucket with an aerator, you go down there where you know these stripers are at, put 1 7 feet under a float, and you pitch a trout in there. When the trout sees the striper coming, he comes up on top. Guess what you get to see? You get to see a 25-pound striper annihilate a live trout right off the surface, right in front of the boat. It makes you feel like you're 5 years old again. And like I said, if it's not for you, it's not for you. But it's a side gig. It's not something we're going to do for hours. We're going to go down through there, maybe put a few baits in the bucket, get to a spot where I know there's 5, 6, 25 stripers, pitch that trout out there. Let's see what happens. Can be a lot of fun. In all honesty, July and August, it's hot. It's real hot, 90, 95. We'll eat lunch in the shade. Fishing, not a ton of shade out there. Got to know that going in. We're going to drink a lot of water. Bring your long sleeves, your solar flex shirts, your sunglasses, all that kind of good stuff. Because it can get, like I said, 95 is 95. I mean, I'm sure y'all fishing that here at times, and it's pretty rough. Fall is brown trout time. Brown trout start moving around usually into September, 1st of October. These fish migrate. A lot of them migrate to their spawning spots. They may not be, the fish in the very bottom end of the river. They may actually spawn in the upper end of the river. They got to get there. They're going to start moving. What that does is that gives you some shots at some really nice fish that the rest of the year these fish are under a log, 8 feet deep in a hole. You don't see them. But you catch that fish when he's moving. Maybe he's in 2 feet of water right in front of you in a river. You get some really good shots at some big fish in the fall. And I'm talking, October, November. The brown trout on the Watauga River typically will spawn last 3 weeks in November. They don't all exactly go at the same time. And on the Holston, these two rivers are 15 miles apart. They're very similar. I have no idea why they're different. On the Holston, the fish are a month later. They always spawn in December, give or take. And there may be some outliers to that, but generally, brown trout spawn on the Watauga in November, on the Holston in December. And when all that's going on, not a lot of dry fly fishing in the fall generally, mostly nymph fishing. A lot of the wild rainbows will load up in some of these places behind these fish, just like a little kind of a mini Alaska. And they want to eat every egg they can get their mouth on when these brown trout are spawning. Makes for some pretty cool fishing, a lot of sight fishing as far as seeing the fish in the water, that kind of thing. Get some great weather in fall. The leaves are changing. Both these rivers have a lot of foliage on either side going down the river. It's beautiful. Usually your weather's pretty nice. Kind of getting back toward that spring pattern. Kind of that, can be cold-ish, but 55 to 70 range. But in a nutshell, that's kind of your seasons as far as the South Holston and the Watauga go. We have a number of good smallmouth rivers really close to Asheville. The Pigeon in North Carolina in the spring is really good. Usually by summer, can't float that anymore, it's getting too low. The Pigeon in Tennessee below Watauga Dam, excellent tailwater smallmouth fishery. That's available pretty much all the time. The French Broad right through Asheville, depending on which section you float, can be kind of some urban industrial fishing, but holds a number of nice smallmouth. Again, generally the season for smallmouth is April through October. Generally, the big hens are the first ones to wake up. These are the biggest smallmouth that you see all year, and that's going to be a pre-spawn kind of thing. Usually these smallmouth will spawn full moon in May, full moon in June, depending on water temps, depending on our weather. But those hens that wake up first, those are your 3.5, 4, 5 pound fish that you want to try to catch. Smallmouth, if you have never smallmouth fished, they're a fantastic game fish. If you take a 3-pound largemouth and tie him to a 3-pound smallmouth, that 3-pound smallmouth is going to tow that largemouth around all day long. They jump, they pull, they actually make runs. The fight is not particularly like a largemouth. What is like a largemouth is that they're a bass, so they're finicky. Barometric pressure change, things like that. Smallmouth, I always like to be honest with people, smallmouth fishing is typically really good or really bad. There is not a tremendous amount of in between. There's some, but it's one of those things where you can be fishing, throwing the same thing you've been throwing for the last 3 hours, and go on a streak and catch a fish on almost every cast for 45 minutes. And then it dies again, and you can't buy a fish. And you haven't changed anything that you're doing the entire time. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of it. I really like smallmouth fishing, but I don't want to oversell it. The river conditions on our smallmouth rivers are much more volatile than our trout streams. They are always, the smallmouth are in lower elevation rivers, so you've got collection points from other rivers. More sediment. It's way easier for a smallmouth river to get blown out than it is for one of our trout streams. So you've got to keep that in mind if you're attempting to go smallmouth fishing. You've got to be flexible with us, because just for example, let's take the French Broad that runs right through Asheville. And if you go north of town, it can be incredible, but I didn't want to make it sound bad. It can be really scenic north of town, beautiful river. But let's take that for example. One bad thunderstorm, and she's muddy for a week. That's hard to deal with. It's hard to book a smallmouth trip 3 months out and say, I want to fish the French Broad for smallmouth. I do too, but I can't control the rain, so that's something you want to keep in mind with the smallmouth offerings that we have, is that just the smallmouth rivers are a lot more susceptible to rain and getting blown out and muddy than our trout streams. So if you book a smallmouth trip, I would say when it comes time to run it, try to be willing to be flexible with us. We may have to go trout fishing that day, because the smallmouth fishing, we don't want to take you down a muddy river where you're not going to catch it. You know what I mean? So a little bit of flexibility there. And then fishing style flexibility. Those days when those smallmouth are really hard to catch, with a spinning rod and a soft plastic crawfish jig or a fluke or a jerk bait or a spinner bait, you can increase your odds of having a good day if the smallmouth are in a really good mood. probably not going to be a problem to get them with a fly rod. If they're not in a good mood, we're going to have to slow everything down and fish jigs or fish, like I said, jerk baits, something with a little bit more going on than a fly. So you want to be flexible with us on the smallmouth fishing. Me nor really any of my guides are going to get in a boat on a smallmouth trip without 2 spinning rods in that boat. You don't have to use them, but they're going to be there. More so as a fail-safe than anything else. But I always like to tell people that so there's no surprises when it comes down to it. So that is my part, and